This hour of the Costa Report is brought to you by Dole Food Company, the world's leading producer and distributor of fresh fruits and vegetables.
Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of Straight Talk Radio. I want to open today's program by welcoming our military personnel who join us every week from remote outposts around the world, and also our nation's veterans. Thank you for your service to our country and for your many emails and letters. My guest today knows a thing or two about the sacrifices our men and women in uniform make. Three-time presidential candidate and American diplomat, Mr. Alan Keyes, will be joining us in just a moment. You may not know that Keyes' father served in the United States Army, and as a result of his father's career, Keyes had an opportunity to travel and see quite a bit of our country before enrolling at Cornell University to study political philosophy. Following Cornell, Keyes continued his undergraduate work at Harvard University, where he obtained his PhD in government affairs. Just prior to receiving his degree, Keyes began working for the U.S. State Department under United Nations Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick. He became the consulate in India and 1 year later was assigned to Zimbabwe. Then in 1983, President Reagan invited Keyes to serve as ambassador to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. Keyes also served as Reagan's Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizational Affairs. Keyes has run for the U.S. Senate 3 times and also for the presidency 3 times, most recently in 2008. I also want to be sure I mention that in addition to being a popular media commentator, he has also hosted his own radio and television programs, and he is a prolific blogger. It's my pleasure to welcome to the program today a relentless voice for conservative values, Mr. Alan Keyes. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Keyes.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
Let's open the program today with something that I know is on everyone's mind, this recent IRS scandal that is unfolding. Now we don't know all the facts yet, but you have quite a different take on what this is all about. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, see, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that a number of things that are going on right now actually represent elements of the major crisis that our whole way of life is facing. And I think that there are elements now in America. The spearhead of them is Barack Obama and what I call the Obama faction, the people whom he has brought into government, who have lifted them up into a position of power. These people are committed to ending our system of constitutional self-government. It's incompatible with their ideology in every way. But that also means that there are elements of our social life that are incompatible and our economic system that are incompatible. And finally, of course, the whole idea of constitutional constraints is incompatible with what they have in mind. And I think the IRS scandal is one element of that, in which we're actually seeing, if you step back and look at it, what they are essentially doing is what communists have always done when they take over a government. They make use of the powers of government in order, first of all, to identify and then to repress those who are going to stand against their agenda. The idea that there's freedom in politics has nothing whatsoever to do with the way in which socialists and totalitarian communists have conducted themselves throughout the history of that ideological understanding. And so what we're seeing here, dressed up in a dispute over American institutions, is a thoroughly un-American agenda that is being implemented by Obama, and that whether it's Obamacare, where Lerner was going to. Now, keep that in mind. The lady who had presided over these abuses against people who oppose the Obama faction by the IRS was going over to administer Obamacare. From the money issue, she was going to the takeover of the life and death issue. And assuming that she adopted the same attitude, you get where we're going. We're going to a society where your participation in politics and even the questions that affect your health care, your life and death decisions are going to be tainted and tinged with an ideological discrimination.
Now, one of the things that you're known for is not cherry picking these issues. And I think one of the things that you object to is looking at the IRS scandal as though it's a standalone issue. You like to look at how it's connected to other things. And I believe you quoted Rules for Radicals, written by Saul Alinsky, as let no crisis go to waste. And that this crisis, in fact, is being used to stage theater. Is that right?
Well, I think that's basically what's going on in general right now in our politics. And whether you talk about the economic crisis that we've been subjected to, what is going on now in terms of the crisis of our political institutions, and as I put in a piece I wrote recently, you can see through the manipulation of what is happening even in our international affairs, the willingness, in point of fact, to exploit situations of threat and danger. In order, for instance, in the case of Obama and the Obama faction, to justify the consolidation of domestic power and military-style force in the hands of a domestic national police agency like the Department of Homeland Security, which we have never had before in America because it was always understood to be a deep threat to our liberty.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about, the threat to our liberty and consolidation of power and how that goes about a little bit later in the program. I wanted to ask you a question. What do you say to folks who claim that the president can't possibly micromanage every person, every policy, every action taken by every agency? So we're bound to find someone has overstepped or exercised bad judgment. I mean, even in the Bush administration, we had Paul Bremer admitting that $12 billion was missing out of the reconstruction funds in Iraq. And Bush went to war on the basis of non-existent weapons of mass destruction. I mean, there are going to be mistakes made. There's going to be malfeasance. Why do we tend to jump on that and assume that that's part of a larger movement?
Well, meeting no particular offense, let's put aside for a moment the question of particular facts and circumstances, right? Mm-hmm. Let's talk simply for the first moment in terms of responsibility under the Constitution. Who is responsible under the Constitution for the executive branch of government?
Well, the President Obama.
No, and you have to be very careful about that because it's just the President. The Constitution reads very simply, the executive power of the government shall be vested in the President of the United States.
That's correct.
Period. End of sentence. It's not a number of people. It's not an office. It's not a bureaucracy. It's not some abstract institution. A person is directly responsible.
Well, I understand that, Mr. Keyes, but the point I'm making is our issues are so complex and they require so much expertise. You have to rely on others. Don't you?
No excuse. No, of course you have to rely on others, but you're either a competent or incompetent president. You're going to stand up, run for president, say I want to be president, and then turn around and tell everybody that it's too big a job for me. Mistakes are made, and I'm not responsible for them. It's the latter part.
Well, do you think George Bush was a good president? In your view, was George Bush a good president? Was he a good executive leader?
Not particularly. You're talking to the wrong person.
You know what I love about you is you're an equal opportunity critic, and I appreciate that very much.
Well, let me be blunt about that because this is not a kind of off the cuff or personal judgment about G.W. Bush or anything. The most egregious failure of our national security, and in many respects, in terms of the loss of life and so forth, the most costly failure since Pearl Harbor, occurred on G.W. Bush's watch. Mm-hmm. And it occurred with respect to a threat that people had tried to warn the Bush administration about, whether it's Condi Rice or others. They had not taken those warnings seriously. They had not been proactive in trying to rebuild our intelligence capacity and other things that would have helped to forestall it. And it hit us. And it hit us in a devastating way that we are not recovering from. We are burdened. It is burdening us, and it may very well push this republic over the cliff of oblivion. So to say that G.W. Bush was some kind of competent president is more than I'm willing to do.
Well, on that note, we have to take a short commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about those liberties that we're concerned about and IRS overreach with Mr. Keyes. You're listening to the Costa Report.
This Legal Minute is brought to you by Nolan, Hemmerly, Etienne, and Haas, experienced attorneys providing professional legal services to the Central Coast for 85 years.
Hello, this is attorney Stephen Wagner with your Legal Minute. Have you ever said to yourself, there ought to be a law for that? Well, often there is. In today's segment, I will address the issue of distracted driving, and here's my opening salvo. Smartphones make dumb drivers. Of course, I'm talking about all those other drivers. The laws vary from state to state, but there is one common thread. These laws were legislatively put on the books because of the outcry of concern over drivers who are texting, talking, emailing, and tweeting. Distracted driving is nothing new. We used to look at the cows in pastures. Now we take photos with our smartphones. In California, there are over 20 million licensed drivers. 20 million. Here's a scary thought. Just think about how many of those 20 million own and use cell or smartphones. I can't possibly cover all the laws in all the states, but I can say that the trend is to prohibit or sharply curtail some uses of smartphones while driving. Whether this leads to a new species of liability remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. With each new feature and amazing breakthrough in technology comes a new and tempting distraction. As new laws go into effect, it will be interesting to see how this impacts the law of negligence. I predict that these new laws will expand the application of important negligence concepts such as duty, breach, and causation, thereby creating more liability theories. While we marvel at the great advances in technology and the cool things that our smartphones can do, they just keep on getting smarter. But do we? This is Stephen Wagner, and that's your Legal Minute.
Brought to you by Nolan, Hemmerly, Etienne, and Haas. Selected in 2013 as one of the top law firms in the United States by Martindale-Hubbell.
Performance Bicycle, the nation's largest online cycling retailer, has created the largest sales event in their 31-year history. Now through Memorial Day, everything's on sale at performancebike.com. Over 10,000 items, all on sale with savings up to 70% off. Save on every bike we sell and all the gear you need for every style of riding. Every helmet, jersey, short, shoe, part, accessory, everything is on sale. The Everything's on Sale event at performancebike.com runs through Memorial Day. Don't miss it.
Ace is the place. Ace Hardware Stores, ladies and gentlemen, located in Watsonville, Freedom, Marina, Salinas, and Gilroy. These are the 5 Ace Hardware stores run by my friends Manuel and Carlos Rodriguez, 2 brothers in Watsonville who've been in the hardware business for 25 years, long enough to know that when you walk into a hardware store, you want service. You know the merchandise is there, but you don't want to have to walk up and down the aisles for God knows how long to try to locate it. You want somebody to walk up to you and say, "Hi, welcome to Ace Hardware. What brought you to us today?" You give the answer, and the next thing you know, you're in the right part of the store looking at the merchandise you want to see. That's the service you get at Ace Hardware Stores in Watsonville on Main Street, in Freedom, corner of Green Valley Road and Freedom Boulevard, in Marina on Reservation Road, in Salinas on North Sanborn, and in Gilroy on 1st Street. These are the 5 Ace Hardware stores the Rodriguez brothers run, and those are the ones you want to go to. That's the place you'll get what you want every single day. Monday through Friday, 8 to 8, Saturday and Sunday, 8 to 6. Ace Hardware, your ace in the hole.
It's The Way of Love Live, the variety show committed to bringing you positive stories and life-affirming messages.
Combined with enough inspirational music and satirical comedy to make it worth everyone's while.
Together we focus on the most important issues of the day by exploring informed and enlightened approaches wherever we can find them.
Using serialized fiction, we bring to life great stories from the past and sci-fi possibilities of the future.
Join us every Saturday, 5 to 7 p.m. for
It's The Way of Love Live.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is American diplomat and activist Mr. Alan Keyes. And before the break, you were reminding us that regardless of whether we're talking about George W. Bush or President Obama, the responsibility for the executive branch falls on the shoulders of one individual, the President of the United States. So let's talk about the Internal Revenue Service for just a moment. Recently, you made a point that under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, we're protected from compulsory self-incrimination. And yet when it comes to the IRS, they can override that protection and demand by law that we answer the question of what was your income and from what source was it derived. So I think the point that you were making is that the IRS has laws that are unconstitutional. Is that right?
Well, yes, I've often made the point that, and here I'm talking in particular about the administration of this particular form of taxation, right? I like to remind people it wasn't the form of taxation the founders envisaged as financing the national government. It was implemented, as most people know, at the beginning of the 20th century during the so-called progressive era. Isn't that a coincidence?
Now, how was this allowed to happen?
Well, we saw the tax that Marx and Lenin thought was essential to the promotion of socialist communist-style government implemented during the so-called progressive era, right? But the key thing that I'm pointing out right now, and I thought it was particularly ironic when Lerner was taking the fifth, right?
Yeah.
That here you have somebody who's suspected of some kind of malfeasance, and she's taking the fifth so she won't have to answer questions, hiding behind the very provision in the Constitution that the whole system she oversaw systematically violates and denies by putting Americans in a position where they are being compelled by law to answer this question, regardless of its consequences from the point of view of their future prosecution for this or that or the other offense. And, of course, the Constitution says you can't do that. You know, you can't force people to provide testimony against themselves in this first-hand sort of way where you're signing and being forced to bear witness against yourself under compulsion. And they try to pretend, oh, it's not compulsion, it's voluntary. But you and I both know that that's just an egregious lie. And that is a feature of the whole system, which has led me over the course of years. There are many arguments to make against the income tax system.
So someone who is overseeing the IRS can plead the fifth, but those who were persecuted by the IRS didn't have that option.
That's true. I have said, I remember going on Sean Hannity's radio program once a while back and saying that I think I was running for president at the time. I said one of the first things I'd want to do is institute an order which required that at the top of all of the income tax forms, they put a version of the Miranda warning. You have the right to remain silent.
Wow.
If give up that right, etc. Because if criminals get to be warned and told that right, why is it that people whose only quote-unquote crime is that they're making a living aren't told that they also have these rights?
Well, the fact is when the IRS contacts you, you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent. It's exactly the reverse of what it should be.
Yes. But I think that's exactly the reason for that is that we have allowed them to completely get away from the what should be the proper constitutional basis for this whole system. It's one of the reasons I don't like it. If you were to replace it with a system where things that were in the record of necessity, as transactions in the marketplace are and so forth, the way the fair tax would be, then you wouldn't have to collect your taxes by violating everybody's rights. Because things that were out there in the open as a matter of public record would be the basis for taxation, and people would be protected against being put in a position where they had to be forced to provide the information that would then be used to convict them of some crime they're not even at that point aware of. It's a system that in its very nature, intrinsically, is contrary to the free way of life, the self-governing way of life we're supposed to have. And that's why in the piece you read, I called it consistent with the fabric of tyranny, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now what we're seeing is that under the rubric and impetus of the ambition that these Obama faction people have to take over and basically monopolize political power according to their ideological agenda, the IRS is being abused in order to achieve that goal because we are most vulnerable with respect to that area where our constitutional rights have been suspended. So that you already have a comprehensive system based on a premise that is basically tyrannical as opposed to, quote, small r, Republican. And that is of a piece, by the way, with the kinds of things that have been going on under the rubric of the anti-terror war to put people in exactly the same position based on the notion that we have to do X, Y, and Z for the sake of national security, so you have only those rights which we let you have.
Right. Well, we'll talk about the security issue in just a moment, but let's stay on this tax code issue, because I'm a big believer that one of the greatest manipulations is to make things so complicated that the person on the street doesn't have a fighting chance. I believe the latest figure is that our tax code's now about 72,000 pages long. And I've long said that complexity favors the wealthy because they have more resources to draw from. And that's the reason GE can hire buildings of tax lawyers to figure out perfectly legal ways not to pay a penny in taxes. And the person on the street who can only afford to file their own returns ends up paying the highest rates.
Well, that's exactly right. I used to say, and still do in my speeches from time to time, that we shouldn't expect that the really wealthy are going to pay taxes. They pay lawyers.
That's right.
They arrange their affairs so that they don't have to pay.
And they find legal ways. It's important for people to know they're not circumventing the law. It is legal for them not to pay taxes.
Now, but the problem is that we've allowed ourselves to get into a situation with respect to the tax system where things are legal that are in fact not constitutional. And more, I think you'll be noticing that that's exactly the position as a people that we are being pushed into. We are
so what do we do about that? Let me ask you, what do we do about that? We've allowed ourselves to be pushed against the wall. And so now we got to come off that wall. How do we do that?
Well, the first and most important thing is that people have to wake up to what is actually going on. You mentioned it, I think, at the opening of the program, that I try to get people to understand that we've got to stop just responding to the pokes and goads and prods of particular issues and start to look at how these pieces fit together into what is essentially what the founders would have called a design, right?
Yes.
To overturn the liberties of the people. I call it a design for despotism. You've got to look for that. And when you start realizing that that's what's going on, you've got to ask yourself, what are the fundamental things that we need, first of all, to tend to in order to thwart this aim of establishing a tyranny over us? And I think the founders themselves were very clear about this. The very first thing you have to be attentive to is you have to be attentive to your own character and virtues. Because if you don't have the discipline and the courage that's required to stand up to those who are destroying your liberty, then you can give up the fight. It's going to be lost. Liberty's not going to be held on to, except by people who have the character and courage to stand for their rights. The second thing is you have to understand what those rights are and what their root is. And the third thing is you have to find representatives, and you have to insist upon representatives who are going to stand for and upon those rights rather than seek their own advantage and ambition.
Now, on that note, we do have to take another commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to find out why the attack in Benghazi was characterized as a spontaneous mob attack. You're listening to the Costa Report. I'm here today with Scott Caraccioli of Caraccioli Cellars. Now, there's a number of ways you can taste wines at the tasting room. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we currently have 9 different wines on our tasting menu, and we really want it to be an experience where you get to taste the wine that you want to taste. So if you want to taste Pinot, you can really focus your flight around that. If you wanted to focus on the bubbles, we have 3 different sparklings that will allow you to build your flight that way. Or if you came in and you just wanted to taste one wine, we would have it set up for you to be able to do that as well.
Now, what's a flight?
A flight is basically a combination of small tastes of different wines. If you wanted to taste all of our different Chardonnays, you could taste the 2007 Chardonnay, the 2008, and the 2009, and we would line you up with an individual taste of each of them.
Thank you for being with us again, Scott.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Krupp's Restaurant and Flight Line Lounge. They were new a year ago. They're still new, but they're better than ever. The menu's been expanded. They still have a great full bar. They're offering specials now 5 nights a week instead of just 1. And also watch the planes come in for landings and takeoffs and enjoy a great salad, appetizer, drink, and a full menu of 10 specialty sandwiches, about a dozen specialty burgers, wonderful specials. Let me give you an example. Their Wednesday night prime rib special, a great 14-ounce cut of prime rib with a baked potato and green beans is only $16. Try beating that. Monday night specials, barbecue ribs. Thursday is surf and turf, prawns and steak, only $16. Props Restaurant and Flight Line Lounge. Open every single day for lunch and dinner. Take the Airport Boulevard exit off of Highway 1, half a mile down the road to Aviation Way, to your left, and there you are at Props Restaurant and Flight Line Lounge. Go, eat, drink, and enjoy. Go on Facebook, look at Props, and make your entry for their new slogan. You might win the first sweatshirt that comes off the line with your slogan on it.
Hi, it's MZ. We at KSCO-KOMY believe that prescription drugs cause much more harm than good and should be used as a last resort rather than a first resort to treat health conditions. We are strong supporters of the 90 for Life program from Longevity, the belief that if you give your body all the 90 essential nutrients that it needs, you will live a much longer and healthier life and not need toxic prescription drugs that lead to side effects that require more toxic prescription drugs, and on and on. Promoting 90 for Life has enabled us to not only survive but thrive in the cutthroat media industry controlled by mega corporations, big government, and big pharma. We believe 90 for Life is the key to health care in the USA. Obamacare is a more expensive continuation of a failed system. With your help, we can save America by getting it healthy again. Please go online to kscoteam.com, get on the 90 for Life program, order a Healthy Start Pack, and get and stay healthy. kscoteam.com.
But T, we're going to do 25 now, 50 now, 75, we're going to go 300, 325, 350, 375, we're going to go 400, 425, 450. Imagine finding an old painting or chair or fishing lure while rummaging through the attic. Is it junk or is it hidden treasure? Hello, I'm Rob Slowinski of Slowinski Auctions and Appraisers in Scotts Valley. Before you throw that item out, you better make certain it's not hidden treasure. And the way to do that is to join me at 2 p.m. Saturday afternoon here at KSCO for Hidden Treasures Radio Show. Put that item on the table in front of you and call the show. We'll figure out what that item is, where it came from, what it's worth, give or take. So don't throw that item out. Instead, join me, Rob Slowinski of Slowinski Auction Company, Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. for Hidden Treasures Radio Show. Is it junk? Or is it hidden treasure?
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is Mr. Alan Keyes. And before the break, we were talking about the systemic nature of the IRS's overreach, and that it's critical not to look at each of these scandals as an isolated action, but rather to connect the dots to see a larger pattern of eroding individual liberties. As I mentioned in the opening, Mr. Keyes, you served as the American consulate in India and Zimbabwe, so you bring a very different perspective to the events in Benghazi. I believe you said that the reason that this was framed as a random mob attack based on a YouTube video, it was to avoid coming to terms with the fact that war is being waged against America. So can you speak to that for a moment?
Well, I think that at the largest level, this administration has been trying to pretend that the war on terror ended, and that we are no longer faced with implacable enemies who are seeking to destroy us and our way of life. And you've seen that in any number of ways, including the outrageous way in which they keep trying to pretend that episodes, including the one that took place at Fort Hood, don't have anything to do with the spread of Islamic jihad mentality and the recruitment of people into that particular mentality so hostile to us and to everything that we stand for. So they've been at great pains to do this. And when this business was occurring in Benghazi, though they had, it is now confirmed, in their possession, the information that this was a terror attack, that it was a result of being attacked by our enemy, they wanted to try to pretend that, no, this is a reaction to some video that was put out that caused people in the Islamic world to get upset. And you know the ironic thing about this? The ironic thing about this is that you are accepting an explanation that sort of makes us to blame for the attacks against us, right? So
Yes.
instead of acknowledging that we're under attack from an enemy, you're saying, well, we're our own enemy because we behave in a way that leads people to get all angry with us and want to kill us.
Yes, the YouTube video was insensitive to their religious beliefs, and so therefore it's a little bit like the mentality of a woman wearing a short skirt deserved to be raped. You know, it was because of how she dressed. I was very offended by that.
But see, I also think, sadly, and I've written about this on my blog, that it's characteristic of the way conquerors treat a conquered people.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're a conquered person, if you have been subject to a defeat that has essentially brought you into the power of someone else, then all the oppression that's perpetrated against you is your fault. Because you shouldn't look me in the eye. You shouldn't speak to me in that tone. You shouldn't dare to criticize the things that I do in this way because you have no status. And sadly, I think in a lot of ways, we have, as so-called president of the United States, leave aside the questions about that, an individual who has been constantly conveying this sense that the American people must abase themselves and must now act as if we are subservient to the very folks who attacked us, which is a way of taking the 9/11 attacks and their aftermath and turning them into a victory for Islam that have put us in the position of being a suppliant, conquered people who must then be sensitive to the pride and reaction of those who are trying to destroy us.
But I think you'd agree that there is a large territory between debasing ourselves and arrogance. You know, it's one thing to come off as the ugly American and say we've never done anything wrong, we've never behaved wrong. And it's another thing to say everything that's occurring we deserve and we are at fault and we're just getting our just desserts. I mean, there's a lot of room between those two. Those two positions.
There's a great deal of room. There's room to understand things based on facts rather than based on these ideologically driven assertions. But, you know, in addition, though, to that larger context, I think there's a serious question about Benghazi that the whole story was fabricated to help distract from. And I have to preface this by saying I know good and well that when you're dealing with things that have to do with our national security, the notion that public officials can tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is a lot of bunk, right? The whole nature of national security affairs, covert operations may be necessary. Other things that have to be done to gather intelligence means that sometimes you don't tell the whole truth. You have to hide some of what you're doing for the sake of your effectiveness and for the sake of protecting the lives of those who are helping you to gather information and making sure that it's accurate. All this having been said, I think you have to look at Benghazi and you have to ask, was this simply an incompetent episode where policy decisions were made that simply came a cropper and resulted in a failure that cost us the lives of people who were involved in a delicate operation? Was it intended, because a lot of the lying took place during an election period, to make sure that that failure was not going to be brought before the American people in a way that would influence the election outcome? When you see people lying, right, the thing you should be asking about is not, are they lying? I mean, in the case of this administration, their lips are moving, they're lying. The question is, what are they lying about and why? And I think that at the bottom of the Benghazi business, you have two things. You have the possibility of rank incompetence, and you have the possibility, on account of the background of Obama, of his people, of things that he has in fact said in criticism of the United States policies in the past, you have the possibility that there's a will at work that actually wants to cut the United States down to size, that believes that we have behaved arrogantly and need to surrender our advantages so that other people in the world will no longer be plagued by our wrongdoing.
But does it? But let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Does it matter if it's incompetence or it's deceit? I mean, either way, we don't want that kind of policy. We don't want to behave in that way. We can't have incompetent leaders and we can't have deceitful leaders. I don't know why it makes any difference. It doesn't to me.
It makes a difference because if it's incompetent, then it might have been the result of just a deficiency of capacity. If it's malicious, and you look at other things that are going on, matter of fact, let's just take
So you're saying you can fix incompetence, you can buttress up the system, put in new processes, but you can't fix deceit.
No, I'm not saying that. You can fix both. But if you're being deceived with a purpose, then you have to think through that purpose. If there is a design, if there is a plan, if there is a method being served by the deceit, then it's really important to you to know what's going on and what other things that might be happening to you it is connected with. You mentioned, for example, this notion that the IRS, you can't be responsible for all this stuff that's going on and so forth and so on. But let's stop for a minute. These are people whose political advantage was served by these IRS abuses, right?
Yes.
Because their political opponents were being attacked. Now, they're telling us that they didn't have any knowledge of this, but they told us that they didn't have any knowledge of the tampering that was done with the Benghazi public statement, that the White House wasn't involved in that. It didn't go to any higher level. They lied about that, didn't they? So if they're lying about what they claim was being done without their knowledge in the instance of Benghazi, why should we believe they're telling us the truth about what they claim was being done without their knowledge at the IRS?
Right. So you're saying that if they're lying about Benghazi and they're lying about the IRS, what are the other things they're lying about? And we need to look at why they would be lying, because they're lying with purpose, and that purpose is to forward an agenda, or as you call it, a design.
And we would have to ask ourselves what is being served by all of this. And the simple fact is that we are looking here at two episodes. One in which you have an IRS that is treating Americans as if they are the enemy, right?
Yes.
And the other, an episode where if you examine some of the things that reportedly were involved in the activities going on at the mission in Benghazi, we were actually engaged in, what shall we call them, delicate operations in which we were working with people who were actually part of the infrastructure of terror that had reached out to attack us on 9/11/2001. Elements of al-Qaeda, both in Libya and in Syria, with a possible connection between the two.
Now, on that note, we have to take our last break, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Just about everyone knows that fruits and vegetables are good for our health, but not everyone knows how to build a healthier plate. Hi, I'm Amy Tobin, a cookbook author and culinary expert. For each meal, nutrition experts recommend filling half of your plate with fruits and veggies. Whether it's fresh berries with your breakfast cereal, a wrap filled with your favorite roasted vegetables for lunch, or a medley of crunchy veggies for a pre-dinner nibble, Dole provides the freshest and highest quality produce available. When you load up on all the nutritional good stuff, you give your meal an instant boost of color, flavor, and texture, plus vitamins and minerals and fiber. Everything your body needs to succeed. For nutritional inspiration and to learn more about Dole's fresh, whole, and cut vegetables and a full line of berries, visit Dole.com. With Dole as your partner in health, the possibilities are endless. Visit Dole.com.
What does your website do for you? Does it simplify doing business and automate routine tasks? Does it connect with your target audience and bring new business? If you can't answer yes, then you need to contact Sunstar Media. Located on the Monterey Peninsula for over 17 years, Sunstar Media has developed websites for startups, brick-and-mortar stores, to corporations on the stock market. What makes Sunstar different is the customization that goes into every site, tailored to each client's unique needs and vision. Sunstar's experienced pros keep you ahead of the game with their custom-fit development process for website applications that cater to your company's specific needs. Learn more at sunstarmedia.com. Mention you heard this ad on the Rebecca Costa Show and get a free web analysis report on your current site or a free web consultation for your next project. Let's discuss how Sunstar can help you. Reach out to us at sunstarmedia.com.
Run, run, run as fast as you can. You'll never catch me. I'm the Lions Marathon Man. Slip on the running shoes, Central Coast. It's time for a run in the woods. Hello, I'm Lion Gary Benito. Join me and all your friends 8 a.m. Saturday, June 1st for the annual Lions Nicene Marks Marathon. Register right now at active.com. Get out of the house for one of the most beautiful runs on the West Coast, Saturday, June 1st. That's the Lions Club Nicene Marks Marathon. Register now at active.com.
The Lions Nicene Marks Marathon is brought to you in part by Fleet Feet Sports, Brooks Running Shoes, Lighthouse Bank, A&B Insurance Services, Pacific Gardens Chapel, KSCO and KOMY Radio, and Cardiff Pest Control.
Run, run, run as fast as you can. You can catch me at the Nicene Marks Marathon. Register today at active.com. That's active.com.
Ford is generating more positive buzz than any other manufacturer in the world for the second year in a row. And you can always find the best deal on the Ford of your choice at North Bay Ford in Santa Cruz. Hello, I'm Jeff Winterholder. North Bay Ford is a locally owned dealership with low overhead, friendly, small town values, and the best deals on new Ford cars, trucks, and RVs. Get this, Jeff's deal at North Bay Ford.
Forget depreciation. Save thousands with a late model certified pre-owned car or truck from North Bay Ford. Ford certified pre-owned vehicles come standard with a 12-month, 12,000-mile comprehensive warranty, 7-year, 100,000-mile limited powertrain warranty, plus 24-hour roadside assistance. Let someone else pay the depreciation and save thousands with a just-like-new North Bay Ford certified pre-owned car or truck.
When you need an economical focus for your college student, a new Explorer for Sunday drives, or a fleet of powerful F-350s for your construction company, look first to your friends and neighbors at locally owned North Bay Ford. 1999 Soquel Avenue, Santa Cruz, or on the web at northbayford.com.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is Mr. Alan Keyes. And before we heard from our sponsors, you were saying that in the case of the IRS, Americans were treated as if they were the enemy. And in the case of Benghazi, Americans were treated as if they were somehow responsible for instigating the attack because of a YouTube video and insensitivity to and the Islamic religion. But in both cases, I believe you make the point that we are undermining our national and individual esteem. Do I have that right?
Well, yes, we're undermining what you might call the national spirit of the country and our national morale, right? Mm-hmm. Always keeping in mind that when you're in a bad situation, morale is probably the most important thing that you have to tend to make sure you can deal with it. So we're constantly under assault. And we're not under assault from enemies. We're under assault from the folks who are supposed to be our leaders, including Obama, who's basically beating up on us to make us feel worse. That's part of it. But it's also the fact that these assaults involve things like the undermining of our economic well-being, both as individuals and overall as a society, and the undermining of our national security assets and confidence that have tangible material effects in terms of weakening the country.
Well, now let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get to the security issue. You're a great scholar of the Constitution, and one of the issues that you have been concerned with has been martial law and tyranny. And you've stated that if the country can be put into enough of a fearful and chaotic state, that citizens will accept martial law and the government will seize upon that opportunity. Is that something that you've mentioned and are concerned with?
Well, I'm concerned when you have folks who have spent their lives studying the ideology of Marx, Lenin, other communists, the teachings of people like Saul Alinsky and Antonio Gramsci and others like this, whose whole understanding was that you could march through the institutions of a society in order to take over that society and put it under the sway of those who were actively committed to imposing the socialist ideology. And when I see all of these various elements coming together in our foreign affairs, in economic policy, in terms of the assault on our national morale and our character, in terms of the basic principles that we're supposed to be governed by, I look at it and I say, well, wait a minute. If we are going into a bad situation and you have people who have stated out loud that you must never let a good crisis go to waste, you must use it to advance your ideological purpose. If that ideological purpose is to subdue the American people under a socialist government, how can we be so foolish that we would think they will let these major crises, economic crises, national security crises, even crises, by the way, that may be caused by natural phenomena like solar flares leading to effects on our electronics and other things that could be devastating to this country, which are finally being examined. I don't care which area this crisis comes from. Do you really want the government in the hands of people who are seeking to exploit that crisis to impose their power rather than seeking to deal with the crisis in such a way as to represent the best interests and strength and eventual restoration of the American people?
Well, certainly as the society becomes more fearful, whether it's for security reasons or economic reasons or any reason at all, the more insecure we become, the more fearful we become, the more the barn door opens for government intervention and to volitionally give up our liberties. Because we want that security. That's a natural instinct for people to have. So the more you can make the environment a scary environment, I think people will do it volitionally. It won't take a revolution to take those liberties away.
Well, but you see, one of the things that I think was a strength that came from our liberty was that a true respect for individual responsibility and capacity means that when you're dealing with crisis, people are also in the presence of resources of their own that help them to endure that crisis without being dependent on the power of those who happen to be staffing the government, right? If you can arrange things so that people no longer have that kind of an independent basis within their family, within their businesses, within their local and state communities for dealing with the problems that they encounter, then every crisis increases their dependency on you and increases your power over them. I think a very good example of this, which I'll just touch on briefly, is the whole issue of the Second Amendment. You know, if you tell people that you've got to rely on, as Obama put it in one of his campaign speeches, a national domestic security force as large and well-funded as the military, when you could rely on not only local police forces and state police forces, you could rely on what the founders said we should rely on, a well-regulated militia, able-bodied citizens, some of whom have been in the military, some of whom have experience with this kind of thing, who have been organized at their local level rather than under the control of national bureaucrats, to be able to help in the defense of their community, which is going to help people feel more secure, more capable of dealing with their circumstances, whether it's a terrorist attack or other things. I think we're being pushed into dependency, and one of the prime examples is Obamacare, where they're trying to centralize the control of life and death decisions in healthcare so that we will be dependent on the bureaucrats and the politicians for this vital aspect of our lives, and it can be used positively then to control us.
So you make an important point here. There seems to be a new culture being created. The government will take care of your health needs. The government will take care of your security and your gun needs and your protection. You know, and this, obviously, our founding fathers, you know, they spent a long time before ratifying the Constitution. They were worried about the centralization of power. Is it time to have a constitutional convention? Is it time to have a large play here where we get all the states involved and say, let's just take a look at this? Do we need to do something larger than these individual efforts? Because it feels to me, and I had one listener, I hope he's listening now, he wrote a very long letter to me, and he said, I don't understand why we don't make an amendment that requires a constitutional convention every 15 years or 10 years, where we're required to send representatives and delegates, not our representatives in Washington, D.C., but to elect delegates to go to that constitutional convention and take a look and see if the intention of the founding fathers has drifted. Because I think I'm not big on conspiracy theory, but I will tell you I am big on drift theory. I think you can start drifting, and that drift can take on a momentum.
Well, see, I think the great problem, though, is two things. One, I have spent a good part of my life in study of the American founders, right? Mm-hmm. They were human beings. They had their faults and so forth, but they also applied what I think is a really almost providential insight when they put the Constitution together. You do realize that we are in no way in touch with that insight any longer, that there is not present in our society to any degree whatsoever the understanding, the wisdom, the appreciation for the different ways in which character and responsibility and piety work together to allow people to govern themselves, and also an appreciation, by the way, of the fragility of self-government and the fact that nothing like what we have had ever worked before on the scale it has in the history of humankind.
But they were also wise enough. They were also wise enough, Mr. Keyes, to put in an amendment process because they knew that the Constitution itself would have to evolve. Otherwise, why put in amendment process?
Before we can amend the Constitution in a way that is actually going to help to serve and restore our liberty, don't you think we have to amend our own ignorance and amend our own lack of understanding and amend the degradation of our character that has led us to do the one thing they most warned against, adopt an understanding of liberty that is based on licentiousness and self-indulgence?
Absolutely. You get no argument from me there. Now, unfortunately, we are completely out of time. And you know I'd keep you here for hours, but we can't do that. And you're a radio host yourself, so you know we're up against the clock here. Before we let you go, where can listeners go to catch your blog and also stay in touch with you and read more?
Well, the most important place in the center of a lot of my activities now is at loyaltoliberty.com. It's one word, loyaltoliberty.com. You can also reach it by just typing in my name, Alan Keyes, AlanKeyes.com, and you'll get to the same place. And I am posting 2 or 3 times a week, trying to stay on top of events there. And you can also email me if you click on the navigation bar at About Alan Keyes. They have ways of getting in touch with me for email, and also if you might be interested in having me come and speak.
Absolutely. That's all the time we have today. But before we say goodbye, I do want to thank you for taking time to speak with us and for all the wonderful, prolific blogging that you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Keyes.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
And if you think today's program was an eye-opener, well, hang on to your hats. My guest next week is former convicted lobbyist Jack Abramoff, and he's going to blow the lid off of just how deep bribery in our nation's capital runs. So don't miss Jack Abramoff next week, right here on your favorite weekly news magazine, the only program you can trust to put principles ahead of politics. Now stay tuned for the second hour of the Costa Report when we take your calls. Asked and we listened. The new and improved paperback edition of The Watchman's Rattle is now available in bookstores everywhere, including airports across the country. If you've been hemming and hawing about not having time to go online or pick up a copy, well, now you don't have any excuses. Find out why government gridlock, terrorism, epidemic obesity, crime on Wall Street, even problems with education and health care have an evolutionary basis to them. Because when you do, you'll never look at our problems the same way. So pick up the freshly printed paperback edition of The Watchman's Rattle. Don't wait. Do it now. Give yourself a real reason to feel optimistic. That's The Watchman's Rattle, available everywhere you are.
Susan, my wife Celeste, loves your products at True Olive Connection, and she's the one who will tell me, okay, Charles, you need to go in and get this and this, and I have to have some kind of a program because you have so many different varieties.
Yeah, over 37 extra virgin olive oils, half or single varietals from all over the world. What we bring in is farm to table fresh from small producers. Currently, we have 9 organic olive oils, which are fantastic. Last year, we had 6. So we're excited about that. And then we have over 27 aged balsamic vinegars from Modena, Italy. We have a new honey line, a new soap line, a new chocolate line, all kinds of French foods, fun stuff coming in.
By golly, the variety over there is terrific. And also, of course, people are encouraged to do a little tasting.
Yeah, we really encourage everyone to taste everything they want. We're open 7 days a week, 10 to 6 p.m., and we are at 106 Lincoln Street in downtown Santa Cruz, and we're at TrueOliveConnection.com. Opa!
From San Jose to Salinas, Red Hot News Talk, AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz.